Long before George Lucas went gaga and got drunk off CGI, there was a time where he could be credited with creating one of the best trilogies in cinematic history. No, the other one. Now, I'm not here to talk about the original trilogy, I'm here to talk about Crystal Skull. But I think it's important to at least touch on it because the fourth installment, or should I say the Bastard Child, falls under the same headline and cashes in on the same name. First, let's get something straight, shall we? Raiders of the Lost Ark is the best Indiana Jones film. There is no debate. I don't want to hear about how you have a hard-on for Sean Connery or how you're dumb enough to think that eating monkey brains is funny. Raiders is a shining example of an entertaining movie wrapped up in drama, action, horror, suspense, and imagination. The other sequels were good in their own ways, but they simply cannot compete with the original. Temple of Doom took a dramatic step backward, then forward, then backward again like an alcoholic in and out of rehab. Sometimes it was dark and full of over-the-top action, and sometimes it was relentlessly campy and full of loud, annoying screams from the leading actress and terribly spoken English from Short Round. This is a movie that made concessions. Spielberg knew that the audience was going to have a problem with all the heart-ripping and cult-themed atmosphere, so he added an eyeball soup and rafts falling off planes onto mountainsides in a vain attempt to lighten things up. It didn't work. Thankfully, however, Last Crusade brought Indiana Jones back to its roots. Murdering Nazis, looking for gold, burying things under the ground, and most importantly, a compelling and interesting story. I should mention that of all the moments in the Indiana Jones trilogy, the final three booby traps Jones has to navigate to save his father stand out as the most impressive and ends in a very satisfactory way with Indiana and the gang riding off into the distance towards an inevitable next adventure. Now, I didn't, and I don't think anyone else ever expected to see this adventure. After all, Last Crusade has the word last in it and ties up the series in a neat little package. But that being said, I couldn't contain my excitement when after waiting 19 years it was announced that the fourth installment was coming. But then I remember Phantom Menace, and Attack of the Clones, and everything else Lucas has touched since CGI became his preferred method of choice for making movies. At that time I began preparing myself for the inevitable disappointment, but I remember that Spielberg was involved in it, and he, for the most part, does good work. So as much as I wanted to, I held out in the hope camp, keeping my fingers crossed that the movie might be at least as good as Last Crusade. I waited in line at the midnight showing, sat down in a crowded theater and watched in horror as one of my favorite icons stumbled through one of the messiest, worst written, and least believable movies I've ever seen. First, let's start with spoilers, shall we? Aliens. What the fuck? What the fuck are aliens doing in Indiana Jones movie? Taking the previous three movies as gospel, they all contain specific elements. A seemingly invincible Indiana Jones, a new damsel, a plot revolving around a specific religious object which harnesses some kind of supernatural power, blood and gore, gritty mayhem, a worthy and intimidating foe, and some dark humor. Crystal Skull, however, revolves around a decrepit Indiana Jones, a previous damsel, a plot revolving around a religious object that turns out not to be religious at all, but science fiction in origin, bloodless violence, computer-generated mayhem, humor that occasionally hits its mark, and a villain who induces more of a boner than fear and dread. This is what we've been waiting for. Take a moment to consider that. It's been roughly 19 years since Last Crusade to Crystal Skull, and this is the best they could come up with. Either they simply didn't execute it well, or they just didn't care, and I have a feeling it was both. The previous movies took violence to fantastical limits. Face melting is surprisingly believable when you've been given some backstory as to reasons why it's happening. But let me get this straight. If an impending nuclear blast is about to destroy my current place of residence, all I have to do to survive is to get into a lead-coated refrigerator, and I'm as safe as I can be? Really? Really? See, this is my biggest complaint with this whole movie. It breaks its own rules. Indiana Jones can get hit in the face 1,000 times and bounce back up like the floor's made out of rubber, but hell, even he takes damage from bullets, and we're supposed to believe that a nuclear blast is going to leave him unfazed? Some have told me that I'm taking this detail too seriously, that I'm supposed to believe to disbelieve, and I tell them that that's true, as long as it's reasonable. Indiana Jones survives a nuclear explosion so easily it makes me wonder what JFK was so worried about in the mid-60s. There are tons and tons of problems in this movie, and I'm sure that you've heard of most of them. But here are my favorite. Monkeys sporting greaser haircuts, swinging on vines, and fighting Russians. A motorcycle rides into a library and nobody bats an eye. Jones never fires a gun. Less blood and gore than Bambi, a villain that isn't interesting or imaginative. Aliens are behind the artifact's origin, and Indiana Jones never fires a fucking gun. Why am I the only one that's outraged by this? And by the way, what's the point of Jones's supposed rival? First he's a good guy, then he's not, then he is, then he's not. What's his use? What does he do other than die in the end? Why the hell is he even in this movie to begin with? The performances of all the characters just come off as flat. I don't blame them for it. After all, if you're going to start off with a crippled script, that the best you can do is stay afloat in a river of shit. The action sequences are fair at best, and just like the nuclear blast thing, go over the top and remove you from the experience. 3 giant waterfalls and everyone makes it out alive? Jesus Christ, why don't you make a bunch of giant ants come out and eat a guy while he's still alive? Oh god, they did that too. This movie was so focused on making a big deal of itself that it lost sight of what made it fun in the first place. And aliens. I know I keep bringing this up, but if you honestly don't see a problem with aliens being in this movie, then you probably have brain damage or cancer of the brain or both. By the time the movie ended, I wasn't surprised they were behind it at all. I had gone dead inside, just like the cliched spacecraft that took off, taking a little bit of me with it. This movie hurt my soul, and I feel like those responsible should be punished for it in an appropriate way, like having their hands cut off or something. I feel like someone took one of my favorite memories of my childhood and threw it into a giant pile of steaming alien shit. This movie was not fun, or entertaining, or even enjoyable as a mindless action movie. It's just annoying and disrespectful. It's about as entertaining as watching a bad version of The X-Files with a fedora on. It's an abomination, a disgrace, an unjustifiable piece of crap to the legions of fans that made this series so popular. It isn't even worthy of being in the National Treasure franchise, let alone Indiana Jones. Maybe in the next movie they'll have the decency to team up. That we all know going into it the movie's gonna suck and that those that make it are total hacks.